how we have a mihi, what a mihi is. I'll touch very briefly on that, but I've had a lot of people asking me to get into te wakaminenga, to get into he wakaputanga, te tiriti and other things. But before we go there, I think it would be good to talk about the difference between government and governance. Now, if you go into anywhere in the world, they have a system of governance. Generally, it's a government that will run them. Here in New Zealand, we have a government. Now, when the treaty was signed, and this waka taparua, this double-hulled waka of ours, was built and put together, we already had a system of governance. However, the world out there didn't want to recognise that. Because you see, the Western world looked at the rest of the world as a place full of savages, full of people that didn't have a civilization. If you didn't have a written language, then you weren't worth considering. However, there was a huge system of governance here in New Zealand. How did it work and what was its basis? Well, if you just consider this for a moment, you have a resource, a river. So there's a group that will look after the river. Let's call them Aotearoa. Then you have the forest, which is a resource for birds, for berries, for timber, for rako. Let's call those people that look after it Ngāti Rako, which is the term for timber, for forest. So when a boy and a girl from those two groups marry and have a son or a daughter, that person that's being born has access to the resources of the river and of the forest. Then you have another group. Let's call them Ngāti Kohatu, the people that look after stones and rocks. And then we have Aotearoa, those that are looking after fish. And a son or a boy is born to those, and they have access to both of those resources. And then those two children get together. And their descendants will have access to the rako, the wai, the water, the ka, the fish, the kohatu, the stones, and then you can extrapolate that out. Remember what we talked about yesterday? That instead of narrowing down our thought process, let's expand it out so it becomes bigger and it becomes broader. So by broadening that, if you go out to every resource and every group that look after a resource, you end up with a person that has access to a lot of things. However, you'll start stepping on each other's toes. You start arguing, say, hang on, no, they're my birds. No, you can't go and take those birds. They're ours. And then you turn around and you say, well, hang on a minute. I am a descendant of this chief, this tupuna. So therefore, if we come down through the whakapapa, through the hekitatai, I have access to those birds. So how was that controlled? Well, it was controlled by ngā tohunga, the shaman, the holy men, the knowledge holders. They remembered all of those liaisons. They remembered how they linked to all of those resources. Now, it may be that you do have access to those birds, but it may only be for 3 days. It may only be for a week. And you'll follow a particular path into the ngāhere, into the forest, to get your birds, and you'll follow a particular path out. And it may be that you make a payment, utu. You make a payment to those that are the caretakers of the birds with some birds. Same with access to the sea, same with timber, same with everything. So you have this, I guess for a want of a better word, you have this lands registration office, but it's inside the heads and the minds of the tohunga. It's held in the wānanga. The wānanga is often translated as school. It's a little bit more than that. They hold the information of all the resources. They hold the information of everything that's going on. And as we spoke yesterday about planets and papa and rangi, they hold the information around what's happening in the universe. Once again, not narrowing down and specializing, but actually going out and holding on to a lot of information. So that's a level of governance. Now, you have a group that come in from Europe, and they're dealing with a Westminster system. Now, the Westminster system, at the time, if you were a landowner, you had a vote. And if you had a vote, you could vote for a person to represent you in the House of Commons. And if you were a lord, the chances are you could sit in the upper house, the House of Lords. So you have this government that is taking care of governance. Here in New Zealand, in Aotearoa, we didn't have a government. We just had these tohunga that came together that sorted all the differences. Now, if you go into the Maori Land Court today, you will find that the one person that can override a decision in the Maori Land Court is a tohunga. Why? Because it's still recognised that they hold the whakapapa, the heke tātai, not of just the people, but of also all of the information that's related to those people and the resources that they have access to. Now, just lock this away in your mind. The lion never ever writes the story of the hunt. The lion never ever writes the story of the hunt. Our histories are written by the conquerors. Our histories are written by the loudest voices. And here in New Zealand, the majority of our histories were written by Europeans. Yes, a lot of kōrero, a lot of talk, a lot of stuff was passed on. But in general, if you go through the libraries, you'll find that our history was written by Europeans. Now, when the universities opened up in the 1970s, late 1960s, and a lot of people started, the working class started getting access into our universities, so did a lot more Māori. And so a lot of research and a lot of writing and a lot of history was being rewritten, was being replaced for us. And it challenged some of the European written histories. Why was it challenging? Well, in 1907, there was an act of parliament called the Suppression of Tohunga Act. That actually outlawed the teachings. That outlawed the teachings of the tohunga, of the wānanga. You could actually be arrested. Sounds crazy, but that's it. Go and look it up, do your homework. Suppression of Tohunga Act, 1907. So a lot of the teaching literally went underground. Add to that teaching, and add to that being forced underground, in the census, and I think it was 1896, might have been 1895, there were 147,000 Māori. Or was it 47 Māori? 47,000 Māori. Of hundreds of thousands, it had been reduced in number. And so, with the loss of people, there's a loss of knowledge. With the loss of knowledge, the books that have been written become the reference point. We go into the library, we grab a book out, it's published, that becomes our history. So we start to mirror the Westminster system as part of ours. Our system was nothing like the Westminster system at all. There was no voting. So when you're sitting on your marae and someone says, oh, let's vote on it, that's not actually what used to happen. You'd sit and talk for hours, sometimes days, and if there was enough kai, it might even go into weeks until you came to a level of consensus. And ultimately, if there wasn't a level of consensus, the majority would go off and continue with the taki. You might just back off and say, well, okay, our hapa's not interested. We'll go and do our own thing. And everyone would say, that's great. Let's agree to disagree. There's a level of governance in that. That is what they called te waka mininga. The canoe that everybody gathered in. The canoe where the rangatira, the kai kōrero, the māngai, the speakers of each hapu, each group, came to. And they sat in that waka and discussed what's going on. Now, they didn't pass law. They didn't sit down and say, you can't go and do this, you can't go and do that, whatever. They didn't pass law. What they did was they expressed what they were doing at home. So let's say I'm the representative of a hapu, and I come in and I go, look, we're in lockdown. This is what we're doing. We're gathering as a family. The whānau's discussing what's going on. We've decided to ration everything. We've decided that all of the groceries that we go and get, they're going to sit for 2 days or 3 days before we get into them to make sure the coronavirus isn't on them and it's died. And you might say, oh, no, that's crazy. That's crazy. Look, we're not going to do that. We're all starving. We're going to get into them straight away. Somebody else might put their hand up and go, actually, no, tautoko kōrero there. We like that idea because they've been telling us that it dies after 2 days. So let's put all the food aside for 3 days. And then we should be safe when we go and open those tins, open those packets and eat it. And then those kai kōrero, those chiefs, take that information back home to their hapu. And they sit down with their wakaminenga. And they say, look, this is what these guys were doing. These guys down in No Taringa, they're actually buying the groceries, sitting them down for 3 days. What a great idea. We're going to do that. So at one level you could say that's a law, but it's not a law in the Westminster system. So let's jump back in time. Let's go back before the whalers and the sealers were here. Let's go back hundreds and hundreds of years. Here in Aotearoa were resources. Tuhora, the obsidian glass out on Mare Island. Pounamu, that comes from the Arohura, from the Taipo, from down a Wakatipu, all in the South Island. How is it that you'll find it in the North Island? How is it that it's turned up in the Pacific as well? That's for another day. How did it get around? It was traded. It was moved. How was it moved? It was moved on double-hulled waka. They were like merchant ships. They would do a figure of 8 around New Zealand. It's a huge figure of 8. And as they did this, they would be dropping off goods. For instance, let's just say out of Dargaville. You come down the Wairau River, down through Kaipara there, and they pick up all these kumara. Now, kumara don't grow in the bottom of the South Island, but they have amazing titi. Fantastic. So let's say those kumara travel all the way down into the south. The kumara are traded for some titi. Then the waka starts to make its way up through Otako, comes up through Dunedin. They've still got kumara. They drop off some kumara and they pick up some beautiful, beautiful birds. Then from there, they head all the way up to Aotearoa. They get to Aotearoa, they go around through to Kaiapoiha. Kaiapoiha was a major place for working greenstone, pounamu. So they then swap some of the kumara and some of the titi for greenstone. Then they head off back up towards Wellington. They go to Port Levy on the way past. At Port Levy, they gather the special shark oil, which is just fantastic for sealing up hulls of waka and stopping them from leaking and sinking. Starting to get the picture? At the same time as dropping off the goods and picking up goods, they're dropping off people and picking up people. So if you go back hundreds of years, you'll suddenly start to realise when you look at your whakapapa, when you go down through your heke tātai, you'll find that you've got tupuna from other iwi, from other hapu. How did that happen? Why did that happen? That happened because of this giant figure of 8. Why isn't it talked about? Why isn't it in the books? Well, the people that came in, and in advance of the people coming in, the process changed. And it changed very, very rapidly. As populations grew, and as we started to fight over some of those resources, we broke down our own systems. We broke down the process. But the memory of that system is in our gene pool. It's actually in you. It's in your heki tātai. So, how do we remember this? How do we know this? It's not in books. If you go into the songs held in the heads of the tohunga, they'll sing you the songs of every landing place of those waka. They'll sing you the songs of every landing place of where people were dropped off and intermarried. The suppression of Tohunga Act and the things that happened before that quietly suppressed, quietly crushed that story. Now, if you kill the story of a people, they take on the new story that overlays them. And we have many, many people going into the library, pulling out books and saying, this is our history. Now, what I'm saying may be challenging. That's okay. It's just a story. It's just a story. So you don't have to get all pumped up. You don't have to get upset because you've read something else. Just go with the story. So when we come back to governance, there's a level of governance around that trading system. Where you go, where you land, when you land, how you land, who you drop off. Now, some of the places they went to were like little prisons, but not the prisons that you see today. No, the wharehere, nothing like that. You see, if you transgressed tikanga, if you broke the rules and you got to a point where you didn't work within the community had you removed. What was the punishment? Well, you may be removed to an outpost. You may be removed to a little island to harvest birds or fish or shellfish or into plant garden somewhere, wherever it was. You would be sent there. Now, part of the punishment or the learning, whichever way you want to look at it, was that when that waka came in to get the dried fish from you, to get the titi, whatever it was you were harvesting, they dropped off. Kai. They dropped off the food that would sustain you. Now, if you didn't harvest the birds or dry the fish, you're not going to get the food. So there's great learning in that punishment. And when your time was up, you'd be uplifted off that island or taken from the mara, the garden, wherever it was on the mainland, and you would make your way in the waka back home. Hopefully a different person. Who were the ones that did that? Who was it that said, hang on, Dan, you've been a naughty boy? So let's go into that process, back into governance. Dan is arguing with his neighbour. Nah, you went in and you took my birds. Nah, they're my birds. We have an argument. We actually have a fight and blood is spilled. No one dies, blood is spilled. So, Te Wakamininga, this is the local elders, the caucus, the tonga, come in. And they go, Dan, you're wrong. These are his manu. You don't have the whakapapa to go and do that. You're actually a thief. Behave yourself. And I say, get stuffed. And they go, oh, really? Get stuffed. And my whānau go, get stuffed. Now, this whānau isn't strong enough to take us out. So there's a group called Te Huringa. Te Huringa, Aotearoa. There is a group, like a police force, for want of a better word. Every hapu in Aotearoa sent to people, to te huringa. Kawea hapu, kawea wairua. They gave up their hapu, they gave up their spirit to te huringa. Why? To become the police force. So, they're called in, and they say, Dan, behave yourself, or you're going to get a crack on the head. And I go, get stuck. So they uplift me and my whānau. Not just me, because you never work as an individual. And my whānau should have told me to sit down and shut up. But they supported me in the argument. So te huringa gather us up and march us off into a desolate area and say, break in the ground, you're going to be planting kumara. We can't fight back. But as soon as te huringa's gone, we go, sod this. Oh, this is a waste of time. So we then march off over the other hill and get stuck into somebody else's birds, somebody else's space. Te huringa are called back in. They then uplift us once again, but this time they don't leave us on the mainland. They take us to some godforsaken island off New Zealand where there's a fantastic fishing ground. Catch the fish, dry the fish. There's your kai. It's going to keep you going for 3 months. Pull your head in, behave yourself. If you fill all those kits with those fish, we'll take you back off the island and we'll take you back home. This is in very simple terms, but that's te huringa. Worst case scenario, if we give them the bird, kua mate. That's it. Not negotiable. Those police actions are actually recorded in written history. Some of those groups that were known as taua, war parties, if you look at the whakapapa of them, they were very, very mixed tribal groups. Some of them actually didn't get on that well. But when you look at the written history of this, and this is what people are often confused about, is you will see the separate hapu who at one point are actually fighting each other, but will join a police action to head off down to Upokoteka, to head off down to Kaiapohia. Why? Because they were part of te huringa. Not in our history books, but held inside the heads of the tohunga, held inside the wānanga. That's part of the governance. Let's jump. We now have a bunch of guys coming into New Zealand, sealing, whaling, taking out trees, spars for ships, huge industry, huge export. So, Dan and his hapu have access once a year to go down to a particular beach to collect, let's say, paua. Collect paua and get some timber, take out some rako. Sailing ship comes in while we're there for that week. Oh, can we buy some of your trees? Not a problem. What do you got? Oh, 10 blankets, 2 muskets. Oh, totally into this. You take what you want, guys. Fish, you go, get in there, have some fish. So they start. We pack up, we leave. We go home. We've got our paua, we've got our rako, we've got whatever the resources that we've got access to, we've gone. These guys are sitting there, they're chopping trees down, having a good time. The hapu, that are the kaitiaki, the guardians of that area, come back from the hills where they've been catching weka because they've got a bit of reciprocity with another group. They come back with their potted birds, they come back down onto their whenua and go, hang on a minute, what do you guys do? Oh, we bought these trees. Who'd you buy them off? Bought them off Dan. Oh, hang on, Dan doesn't own the trees. Yes, he does. He was living here. He doesn't own the trees. They're our trees. Come on, guys. Next thing, whawhai, boom, someone dies. It's all over. Why? Because the new guys coming in didn't understand the governance, the system. And today, we've inherited that. There is so much arguing and fighting going on with whānau. No, that's my grandfather's land. No, that's my grandmother's land. No, uncle, you didn't get that land. No. Hang on. It was actually everybody's land. What you should be arguing over or discussing are the resources that come out of the land, the resources that are within the land, the resources that are in the awa, the resources that are in the moana, not the land. We never owned land. We only had access to the resources, and our governance system was around the resources. So you got this new group that come in. They want the land. To them, the land is the resource. To them, the land is the asset base. So the land speculators in London, Nantucket, Sydney, Australia, hundreds of them in Sydney, Australia, started trafficking in land. That's where the New Zealand company came from. What they were doing was speculating on land. Let's buy land for threepence an acre and sell it for 10 shillings an acre. Let's go and buy 1 million hectares. We're going to make a fortune. We're going to be very, very rich. Because these guys here in New Zealand, they don't understand ownership of land. They're really happy. We can go and look. The missionaries have done it. They've come in. They've got acres and acres of land. Some of the missionaries got 6, 7, 8,000 acres of land to sustain their family. Well, hang on a minute. Let's look at the arrangement. If we go back into our governance system, Dan has access to the land for 1 week to go and get the rako, to go and get ngā manu. The missionaries come in, same process, except our tupuna wanted the missionaries to be there. They were great for trade because they could talk to the guys that had the goods we wanted. Also, we bought into this Christianity thing. We'll talk about that because it is rātapu. We bought into this Christianity thing, or did we buy into this Christianity thing? We have now. Did we back then? So these guys come in. They did an arrangement for the land. Under our governance system, Mr. Missionary and your family, you have this block of land for your lifetime. Listen to it. You have this block of land for your lifetime. You have the right to farm, take the timber, build your house, do what you like. Now the chances are, and this is how it used to work, the chances are the sons or daughters of that interloper, of the missionary, would marry into the hapu. That would guarantee them another lifetime interest and another lifetime interest, and there is a continuum. But the European mind said, I've purchased the land, that's mine. That is a commodity I can pick up, I can take away, and I can sell it. Our tupuna weren't in that mindset. That was a different governance system. For me, and I don't know if this is fact or whatever, this is my opinion, I believe Te Tiriti o Waitangi was actually a real estate agreement. I believe that what was happening, and the missionaries and many others pushed really, really hard for the Crown of England to bring in their law, L-A-W, over our law, L-O-R-E, our system of governance. They wanted to bring in their government over our governance. Why? Because it would guarantee them title to the land. It would supplant a new system on top of our system of how we had governance over our land. Our governance, remember, was over the resources. Their governance is over the land. That's the title on top of the land. Man, now it starts to get really confusing, doesn't it? So let's just recap a bit. There's a difference between governance and government. Governance is how a place is governed. It's the set of rules. It's the tikanga. Tika, ngā, plural. Tika, good, correct. The way of doing things. Ritinga, ritual. So you have your ritinga, you have your tikanga, you have your way of doing things, and everybody works with it. Those that don't are quietly removed until they get their act together and come back, or they're removed permanently. So this level of governance works. What happened in the Westminster system is a government on top of everybody. You're put there to make the decisions for us. You're put there to make laws. They make a law and the law is enforced. And part of that law originally went back to landowners. You couldn't vote in their government system unless you were a landowner. In fact, they brought that system in here. And there was a huge argument about this. Those that could vote in the legislative councils that were established in New Zealand had to be landowners. And then it was argued, hang on, aren't Maori landowners? Oh, gosh, we've been so remiss. Let's give them 4 seats, shall we? Let's give them 4 seats to keep them quiet. That's where your seats of parliament, the Maori seats in parliament, came from, because there was no voice in those legislative councils. Push that aside. We've got the level of governance, we've got the level of government, and Te Tiriti, the missionaries wanted that. So did everybody else that was already living here. Now, at the time of the signing of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and notice I sometimes talk about the treaty and Te Tiriti. When that was signed, and it began on the 6th of February 1840, and then signed elsewhere, Ranunu went on to other places where it was signed, that was the arrangement made between our tupuna and, unfortunately, our tupuna, because the blood's in us. We're stuck with this. It's in us on both sides. So we've got a foot in both camps. But within that, we expected the British Crown, under their governor, kawanatanga, to govern their people under whatever system they liked. We were going to establish, in their eyes, a form of governance that they may be able to recognise as a government, but it was still our governance over our people. By 1840, we also understood that these guys didn't just have a lifetime interest. They had purchased the land. That was understood. We understood they had purchased some land, but they didn't have sovereignty and ownership of all of the land. And if you look at the history in Canada, the British colonists went in and they started what they called factories, and they took or purchased from the local tribe some land. They had created a beachhead, trading post, and the local people came in and traded and wanted the trade. And then what they would do, they would expand the territory by buying some more, expand the territory by buying some more, expand the territory by buying some more, or taking more. It was a factory system. And we understood that here. That's what they were trying to do. They were coming in and they had various areas that were going to be British entities under our sovereignty, not theirs. So we have this government clashing with governance. Now, since that time, our people, Maori, have tried to mirror that system. They've put together Maori parliaments. Kohuiaro, of which I was part. Very, very important part of our history. They were put together, these parliaments. They didn't work. Why didn't they work? Because they were part of another system. If we stayed with our system, perhaps things would be different. And what if the other side came across into our system and we worked with the resources rather than the ownership of the land, the access to the resources? We would have had a much more harmonious history. That's why The Waitangi Tribunal's trying to sort all of this out. Now, coming back to Te Tiriti and the treaty. Te Tiriti o Waitangi is all in the reo. It's written in Maori. The Treaty of Waitangi is a translation of that Maori. When you translate it back, it doesn't say the same thing. Interesting, isn't it? So what happened with the signing of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the translated version was taken off back to Britain. It was gazetted and passed into their law, L-A-W. It made incorrect statements of what had actually happened. And it's only in the last decade that Te Tiriti o Waitangi has finally been recognised. And in 2014, the Waitangi Tribunal found in their conclusions of the hearings in the north that the rangatira, the chiefs that signed Te Tiriti o Waitangi, did not cede sovereignty. Dwell on that for a moment. The chiefs that signed Te Tiriti o Waitangi did not cede sovereignty. But we have assumed that they did, because the gazetted one back over there in England said they did cede sovereignty. But if you go back to the original document, it's now been agreed that's not what it stated. So how do we undo? How do we undo this tangled spider web where the treaty industry, those guys over there, they just want everything. Oh, goodness gracious me, it's got nothing to do with me. Oh, this is just rubbish. Oh, they want this back, they want that back. Oh, they're goodness gracious. No, Te Tiriti doesn't say they want anything back. Te Tiriti says nothing went. Now, that's pretty scary for us as a nation. How do we deal with it? How do we take ownership of the fact that for 180 years we've been living a lie? And it's a big lie to swallow. Well, there is an answer. If we go back to the original concept of one group looking after themselves and another group looking after themselves, like a double-hold waka taparua, we start getting a picture of how we could be living here. Unfortunately, those waka are so imbalanced now, Te Ao Māori is really just an outrigger. It's not as powerful by population. It's not as powerful by resource. It's not as powerful by health and every other statistic as it was. So this canoe is imbalanced. However, we could bring them together and tie them together. The pai. By tying them together and tying them together in a new way so that we can all feel comfortable in whichever hull we're in, and we can all feel comfortable walking across to the other and back and across to the other and back and move forward. But to build that waka, we're going to have to own up to something, and that is the assumed government over what was an existing governance. As an individual, I don't think we can go back to our governance system, but we can take some damn good bits of it and we can actually put it together. You see, if you look at our parliament today, we've got a lot of people represented in parliament that weren't represented prior to MMP. So is there some way we can work with that system and grow it? Is there some way we can take the Waitangi Tribunal's findings and collectively deal with that and put in place a way for us to move forward? Well, a lot will say, don't look at the past. Waste of time. But our past will give us the information we need to take us into the future. However, if we don't recognise our past, our future's going to be a lie. So it's up to all of us to take stock. Let's use this time. That's what I'm doing. Use this time to look at, to shake the tree, see what falls off, get to the level of what is the truth of our history? Why have bits been hidden? Why was the Treaty of Waitangi taught in all our schools? Captain Cook was the person that discovered this place. No mention of Abel Tasman. Oh, he was a guy that flitted through. What about our Polynesian tupuna that came and went from this great land and all over the Pacific? Well, we learnt about 7 canoes that came in a great migration, drift voyage, they found it by chance. What is the truth? What is the real history of this place? Let's open our minds. Let's go to the possibilities of who we actually are and not narrow it down and get ourselves trapped in being specialists of some area. I was at a hui in Waitangi about 10 days ago, and this guy stood up. It was a hui to look and to discuss the Wakamanenga. This guy stood up and he said, I'm a Pākehā. I have no Māori blood, I'm a Pākehā. And I'm very angry about the Treaty of Waitangi because it dispossessed me. This is what he said. It dispossessed me. You see, the Treaty of Waitangi, he said, gave me a place to be. It gave me a level of duality. It allowed me to belong here. But the assumed government has taken away that identity. He said, I don't know who I am. I don't know where I stand. I'm not European, he said. I'm a Kiwi, but I don't know what that means. So if we build this Wakatapurua, if we build this correctly and bind it really strongly, he'll have a place to stand. He'll know who he is. Because the way I was taught was this. If you're born under these mountains, you belong. Not hard, is it? Because what used to happen was whenever new people came to this land, by way of shipwreck, washed up, or by a destination they knew they were going to, they would intermarry with a hapu. That's how they became part of the governance system. And their children were definitely part of not just the hapu, but the very whenua. That's the word for land. Whenua is also the same word for afterbirth. So if you look at the duality of that, you're born here, you belong to the whenua. But because of the pain that Māori have felt of this assumed government over the governance, there's a lot of anger and frustration. And a lot of people don't want to accept that. They don't want to accept that just by being born here, you're part of this place. Well, what I was taught is, you are. So let's see if we can build this Wakatapurua and move it forward into this universe that we're all part of. Tomorrow, we'll climb into He Wakaputanga. Because, as I was saying just a moment ago, Te Tiriti was never taught in our schools. The treaty was, but Te Tiriti was never taught in our schools. And I don't know of many people that knew about He Wakaputanga until quite recently. And by that I'm talking 15, 20 years. There were whispers. There were talk amongst the elders. The tohunga talked about it. Some rangatira talked about it. There were some pretty enlightened guys that talked about it, because some whānau never let go of that punga wera wera, those long, long spiderweb strands that took them to that history. But in general, people didn't talk about it. No one knew what He Wakaputanga o Te Rangatira o Nui Te Reni was, this Declaration of Independence, this Declaration of Sovereignty. Had no idea. Interestingly enough, the Minister of Treaty Settlements, Andrew Little, is now talking about He Wakaputanga. They're now talking about Te Wakaminenga. So maybe it's a conversation we should all have. If you want to do a little bit of homework before tomorrow, go online, look up the Declaration of Independence New Zealand. You'll find it. Just Google it. Look up He Wakaputanga. You will find it. You'll also find a lot of extraneous stuff, but get a copy of it in Te Reo, and alongside it there'll be a copy in Māori. Now remember, it's the Te Reo one that you really want to hook into, but if you can't speak Māori, that's going to be a problem. So look at what the translation says, because we're going to go into that tomorrow. We're going to have a close look at what was in there, who signed it, and why they signed it, and even where it came from. Because when you're doing your homework, go and get a copy of the Declaration of Independence from the United States, and you're going to find some parallels. And tomorrow I'll tell you why, where they came from. Well, they're just stories. A possibility of why, and a possibility of where they came from. Well, that's it. Ka kumatu te kōrero. I hope it's done something for you. If it hasn't, he pai ana. If you want to ask some questions, or there's something you want to go into, put something online. Let's have a chat. Ask me a few questions. We'll see where we can go. At some stage, once we get out of this lockdown, I might invest in some technology, so this can be two-way, so that the picture's a bit clearer and not as blurry as what you may be seeing now. And oh, by the way, someone commented on the shirts. Have a look at this. There's a pocket there you can't see. That's how good Margaret is in actually making these shirts. She stitches them and makes a beautiful, beautiful shirt. So Margaret from Beeline, thank you so much for the shirts. Love them. Got a wardrobe of them. In fact, I'm going to try and wear them, or every day I'll see if I can have a different shirt. I won't do the same haircut, but I'll try and do a different shirt. You guys take care of yourselves. Love each other. Avoid the brittleness. Yep, living close together. It's only day 4. We've got a lot of days to go yet. Lots of prayers, and our heart goes out to the families that have someone that's now got coronavirus. Let's hope. Keep our fingers crossed, keep our hearts open that they get through it. Let's put our hearts out there for the guys from Air New Zealand that got it. They got it by getting us home. They did it for us. And I have heard on the news that there are some people ostracizing people that are saying they've got coronavirus. Come on, guys. You might be a carrier yourself. Let's just taiho, slow down, take it easy, and get ourselves through this.